Okay, it's recording. So, I've been seeing people, well, I've seen a few Deltarune theories posted online, and I decided to put in my own thoughts on the subject. And I felt one thing that I didn't really see people talking about, um, which you can notice the moment you enter the dark room, the dark world. Where is it? Oh, I need to click Dark World to get to. I would show it um through the game, but I felt this would be quicker than going around finding this stuff. But you can find that using the cell phone makes the noise that many of us believe is related to Gaster, which I think is very interesting because it seems to suggest the Dark World is heavily related to Gaster, rather than just a small section of it, which actually brings a few ideas to mind about what exactly the fountains of darkness are. Because the first thought would probably be that they're natural. But I think a much more interesting thought would be that neither of them are natural. Because remember, well, if you've seen stuff about Gaster, there's a comment about where he's experimenting with something and says that it's emitting negative photons and that it's dark but darker. Well, I wonder if that is related to why it's called the Dark World, rather than it literally being dark. Because uh, I'm Gaster was basically split apart across multiple timelines. So it might be possible that that dark fountain is the first one is a fragment of Gaster, which begs the question: if we're assuming that, what would that make the second dark fountain? Um, I'm kind of of the belief that there's multiple factions that are probably going to be in the next chapter, which is why I'm not sure whether the whole Char-like encounter at the end is even related to the Dark World. But one thing that I am certain of is actually about Raziel, which I don't know how many people noticed this, but enough people noticed it for it to end up on the wiki. It's actually how I originally noticed this one myself, which is horns. Bring me to that. Basically, this particular statement, which is about how Chris used to wear a headband with red horns on it. Now, I find that very interesting because, well, obviously, this whole Razol thing seems a bit strange. In up until you know about the fact that Chris used to wear a headband with horns of the same color as Razol's horns. Well, it was red. These appear more pinkish, but red is a light pink, so. But it actually makes Razel make more sense. Because if you pay attention, each creature in the Dark World appears to be some type of toy in the Light World, which makes Razel stick out like a sore thumb because they appear as if they're not a toy. But the fact that the horns are in odd color are actually the clue of what Raziel actually is, which is some manifestation of Chris, which seems a bit which may seem a bit odd, because then you might wonder, why isn't there like uh Chris just Raziel instead of Chris? But I don't know if Raziel is still part of Chris or just was part of Chris, but I'm pretty sure there's a connection there. Yeah, which, um, of course, Chris doesn't have glasses, so, but Chris also doesn't have four. So I'm kind of guessing Raziel is what Chris wants to be. Um, so I'm uh, uh, also thinking that, based on in-game evidence, this isn't really, despite everything that I've said about Chris so far, this isn't really Chris's story per se. And I'm actually thinking that, if anyone's familiar with Kingdom Hearts, they have this little dive to the heart thing, a sort of inner world that is real, but it's just not real on the physical plane. I'm pretty sure that's what's going on with the Dark World. That's why these characters are represented by toys, which makes me believe that the Dark World, while related to Gaster, also is drawing upon emotions from people from the Light World, which likely means that there's some type of for each manifestation in the Dark World, there's probably at least one person related to that manifestation. I am not certain what Susie's would be, but there is the interesting point that just before Susie attacks the king with her axe, he says the very same words she said to him, said to Chris when she slammed Chris against the locker. So, not sure, but maybe that's related. Of course, there is the possibility that after these creatures were spawned, they took on a life of their own, and there we don't really see reference to how exactly the Gaster noise is involved, but I am thinking, this probably sounds like a bit like rambling because I'm throwing out a bunch of information at once, but I'm thinking that Susie is actually the main character of this, in a sense, because, interestingly enough, well, it's multiple things, but one of the bigger clues, I think, is the name of her attack is Rude Buster, which also happens to be the name of the song that plays in normal combat. There's also the point that she seems to be having, like, the most character development in this. But I'm thinking it for one other big reason, which is, recall how at the end the Chara-like being threw out Chris's heart into a cage. Now, I think that's kind of showing what the whole your decisions don't matter thing is tying into. I think that in the next chapter, you're actually going to be playing as Susie, eventually with Chris's soul inside of her. So that when you're in the light world, you'll be Susie, and when you're in the dark world, you'll be your party of three, since the dark world is more spiritual in nature. Perhaps why Gaster's manifestation might be stronger there. Though, I think based on the idea that Gaster is related to the Dark World, there might be evidence that you didn't close the fountain as much as you thought you did, because there's these double doors near the end of... Let's see if I can get something up on it. Would it be Overworld? Light World? Yeah, not getting it. Hometown. There we go. Mysterious door. A path south of the House of Worship. The door is locked and appears rusted with clinging vines. The door is labeled as a bunker and internal game files. Didn't know that. Below the doors, a low, dull noise can be heard, which I saw a video on YouTube that someone actually sped up that noise, and apparently it sounded like Gaster noises, which, assuming there wasn't anything funky going on in that video, which I think would be pretty silly if someone did do that, but I'm basing this theory on the idea, this part of the theory on the idea that that was legit. I'm thinking that the whole hearing Gaster noises there is evidence that the Dark World is leaking in. Oh. Okay, yeah, no, there is something on the wiki saying that is true, so they more than just that video. I think there's a lot more going on with, like, the knight they mention in the queen that Jevil mentions, but I think for the most part there's not enough stuff to tell where all that ties in. But I'm thinking there may actually be more than one faction at play in the next part. But I am thinking in the next part, you're not going to be controlling Chris. And that you probably won't be controlling Chris's body for the rest of the game. So if anyone wants to discuss and say if they think I missed anything, or... I'd like to hear feedback. No, that's not how there it goes.